It's our bold predictions episode. Find out who we think will meet the extreme. Plus, World Series predictions, a recap of draft season trends, early fab advice, and we'll talk some softball. A loaded episode with Yahoo's Scott Pianowski next on Beat the Shift. And welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always is Ruven Guy. How are you, Ruven?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Well, it's opening day. Of course we're going to be doing fantastic. Baseball has started. Our Mets were unfortunately rained out, so we got to wait one more day to watch our fellows go from Citi Field. But how are you doing today? Are you enjoying the games?
I'm enjoying the games, but not enjoying the injuries because I'm looking at my fantasy teams and some of them are already being impacted, which is not fun first day of the season.
Yeah, that's going to happen on occasion. Hopefully we don't have too many shares of those guys, and hopefully, more importantly, the players aren't injured too badly. Well, we've got a fantastic episode today. We're going to have some strategy. We're going to do predictions. We've got a fantastic guest. You know him from Yahoo Sports, Scott Pianowski. How are you doing, Scott?
Doing great. As you said, it's opening day. It's a beautiful day, beautiful spring day in Detroit. Tigers are 1-0 on the way to 103 wins in the AL Central Championship. I have some Jason Foley shares. Looking forward to talking to you guys. You know, it's not on the show, but when I joined the space where we're taping this, you guys were talking about a keeper league that you're playing in and what you're going to do this year. And I know it's not part of the program, but it just reminded me of conversations I've had with my longtime fantasy baseball partner because this game is great. It's great no matter where you're at, whether you're a favorite, whether you're rebuilding, whether it's a redraft, it's an auction, it's a snake, it's people you know, it's people you don't know. You're playing for a ton of money. You're playing for 10 cents because you want to beat your college roommate, whatever. It's a great time of the year. I mean, the college basketball tournament's going on, the NCAA hockey playoffs are going on, and opening day is here, and it's just glory. I know everybody was scheduled, a few games got rained out, but when these days when you have the whip around coverage and a bunch of people are playing at once, nothing makes me happier than that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to be in Texas in a week or so. I'm going to see a Rangers game. I'm going to see a Dallas Stars hockey game. It's en route to seeing the solar eclipse in
That's
Dallas.
Right. I heard that when you were on the great Patrick Davitt Baseball HQ podcast. You were talking about that. I guess there was one in Nashville maybe 10 years ago or something like that. Do I have that right?
7 years ago, I went to see it in Nashville. You know, you want to be where it's going to be clear skies, and Nashville was a great time this summer. The best place to view it is going to be in Texas in the U.S. You don't want to be in upstate New York where it could be cloudy any day like today was rainy. So we're headed to Dallas there.
So if you don't catch this one, what's the gap towards the next one?
In America, about 20 years. Okay. And eclipses are once-in-a-lifetime events, so, duty calls for me to see it at least.
Just don't buy any plants right after the eclipse. Just a little tip. I don't know if everyone gets that little thing, whatever, yeah.
I was going to make a Bonnie Tyler total eclipse of the heart joke, but, for the three people who would get that, just insert your own joke here, pause for a moment and say something that makes you laugh. And then proceed with the podcast.
Yeah.
So before we get into the heart of it, I did not get a chance to see you at Tout Wars, although we were both in New York. Unfortunately, we were both drafting at the exact same time, and you had to be helicoptered in from Boston. Can you tell us about that?
Oh, Tout. What a fun weekend. Unfortunately, I didn't – a lot of things I wanted to do, but I didn't have a lot of time to do them. I like to make this trip back to New England like 4 or 5 days. And I had to squeeze in 2 days. I had to squeeze in my hometown draft. Well, it's not hometown anymore, but the guys I grew up with. That was a Massachusetts draft. And then I decided I hadn't seen a good friend of mine. My friend Rob McNeil. I was in his wedding, a longtime old friend. He's a Boston College kid. They're playing in the hockey tournament. So I thought, let's just go to the hockey game, even knowing that I had to be at Tout Wars the next day. And so we went to the hockey game, watched BC kick some ass. And then I drove to Connecticut. Slept for, 3 or 4 hours. And then I drove into New York. Thought I gave myself plenty of wiggle room, but it was, St. Patrick's Day. There was a big parade or a marathon going on or whatever, and a lot of the streets were shut down. And even though I got there 45 or 50 minutes later, I had to kind of scramble to find a place to park and get to the draft with a little bit of wiggle room. So I was a little nervous during all that. Plus, I wasn't feeling that great. The seasonal change always kind of messes with me. Last year, I had to actually cancel my trip to New York because I was so sick. But I don't know. My allergies in the spring, it just, even though I'm in a great mood emotionally, it just seems to mess with me a couple of times. So my stomach was kind of gurgling during the draft. I know nobody wants to hear all that. But so I don't know that I was maybe in my best headspace to put together a great team, but we'll see what happens. I'd rather be in the mixed league. I think that's a lot more fun than National League only, but any fantasy baseball league is a great league. I hated to miss the party on Saturday. I'm sorry that we didn't get a chance to hook up and connect, Ariel, and so a lot of people I didn't get a chance to see, but it was kind of an in and out quick one for me this year.
Yeah, we met once, although I'm not sure you knew who I was back then. It was 2019.
Oh, I remember you were wearing the Mets jacket. I remember that.
Yeah, yep, there you go. It was the last time we were at Foley's. I introduced myself to you, but just, hey, how you doing? Okay, all right, so we'll catch up next time, I guess.
Oh, Foley's, man, I miss that place so much. That was the coolest. Yeah. It just, and I heard that the meetup this year at David Buster's was really fun. Although Patrick was talking about the temperature was kind of haywire, where it was really hot in there.
It was like 80 degrees in there,
yeah,
but
so
it was a nice space.
I probably wouldn't have enjoyed the temperature, but removable layers, key to life. But yeah. Foley's was, anybody who's listening, you never got a chance to go to Foley's. There's so much soul in that place, so much baseball memorabilia. And they would put out, if you had won Tout Wars the previous year, they would set up the new Tout Wars menu, and you'd get to name a sandwich, and they'd put you on the menu. And it was just the coolest friggin' thing. Those people are so awesome. And unfortunately, it was one of the many establishments that died with the pandemic that didn't come back afterwards, and people even offered, hey, we'll front the business some money to give it a crack, and the owner said, yeah, that's great, but we're it's time to call it a day. And I hope we can find something. Nothing will feel like an adequate replacement for Foley's, and I heard the party was great, but you just say Foley's and a million different memories come back. I can even remember certain places I would sit, and there's a Paul Molitor card here. I think I was sitting at a table one year with Jeff Zimmerman, and there was a Jeff Zimmerman baseball card on the table. It's the great Jeff Zimmerman of Fangraphs. But, good times at Foley's, man.
Absolutely. All right, so we're going to do a little bit of strategy, and then we'll do our predictions. So first, talking about drafting, and, one thing came to mind when I was putting together this rundown is that the draft landscape was really different if you drafted early in, let's say, January or February, before spring training, before some players signed, and it was different at the beginning of spring training, and it was different towards the end if you were drafting just last week. What do you think are the differences, and what do you think are the advantages and disadvantages of drafting early, medium, or late?
I've always been a proponent. First of all, draft whenever you want. I mean, I even have a league that's going to draft after the season starts. I maybe have two leagues that draft after the season starts. There's no wrong time to draft. So I'm always drafting. I'm drafting in January. I'm drafting in February. I'm certainly drafting a ton in March. But I've always been more sympathetic than a lot of people to early drafts because the ADPs haven't become crystallized, and I feel like it's a little bit more of a wide open, nobody knows anything yet. The groupthink hasn't really taken over yet. And that's fun to me. And if you can connect some dots, if you see maybe how a playing time situation or a closer situation is going to play out ahead of time, you can get rewarded for that. That's even more so for me maybe in fantasy football than fantasy baseball. Now, the pushback to that everybody always says is, well, wait a minute. You're going to draft early, and then your whole team's going to get hurt, and then you're going to hate your team, and you're going to feel like you wasted your money or your time or the whole experience. And now, of course, in football, it doesn't take a lot of injuries to wreck your team, but we saw this year in baseball more injuries, I think. I don't have any data on this, but it just feels like there's a lot more injuries this year, and maybe teams are getting really hypersensitive with pitching. The moment anybody's elbow does the slightest bit of a burp, they just want to back off and not take any chances. But I feel like there are a lot of injuries this year. And as you mentioned, the later signings, I mean, Snell was unsigned for so long. Montgomery just signed like 10 minutes ago. So a lot of things are changing. And I can understand that maybe there's something to be said for waiting. I'm going to draft. I'm going to do magazine drafts before the year changes. I was even working on some magazine content before a lot of players had signed yet. I was thinking, are we going to put this magazine up before we know where Ohtani's going to wind up? But thankfully, he eventually signed. But I think any time is a good time to draft. I'm starting to maybe back off the whole idea that, early is better. Maybe I want somewhere in the middle. Maybe the February draft is kind of my sweet spot, knowing that I'll still draft a lot in March. It's just a matter of, do you want to draft before the tracks are in the snow, or do you want some clarity? Do you want a little bit of market to analyze? Because there's not a market really. There's not much of a market to go on in the early draft season. There's a very established track on the snow market in the late draft season.
Your take, Ruven?
Yeah, the early drafts are fun to do because they're really just guessing what's going to happen at the start of the season. If you're drafting, like let's say you go to the AFL and you go to first pitch Arizona and you're drafting then, you're really guessing as to what situations are going to be. There are people drafting all throughout the year. I think the best time to draft will probably be like either 3 to 4 weeks before the season starts, because we'll start to know what the roles are. Most of the free agents are going to be signed, except for Blake Snell and Jordan Montgomery and that type of player, and then JD Martinez. But those guys, they're going to sign somewhere. So a lot of times you can get a discount on those guys because they're just not being drafted where they should be because they're not on a team. So if you can recognize those changes, you could take advantage of drafting when you draft. If you draft a week before the season, you have a better idea of whose bullpen is more stable, who's going to be the closer, what's going on. If you're going to draft, let's say, in the beginning of February or even the end of January, you're really not going to go bullpens because bullpens don't really crystallize until you get closer to the season. So I think the best time to draft is probably about 3 to 4 weeks before the season starts. So, we start doing TGFBI toward the end of February, beginning of March. I think that's the beginning of when people should start drafting. And then you start seeing that people's drafts get affected by spring training results. So I think the best time is like right after that, like right after the beginning of March, second week of March, first week of March, end of first week of March. I think that's the best time.
As an actuary, I'll have to say that the best time to draft is the second before the season starts. You want to limit risk of injury, right? You don't want players going down and, you happen to be hit by that injury. So from that standpoint, I'd rather draft as late as possible, especially if I'm competing in an overall with people who are drafting a little bit earlier. I'd rather draft later. It removes some of the risk. I know the experts draft a little bit early because they want to prepare the general population, the general public, for what the values might be and strategy. So that I understand. Your point is true, Ruven, about free agents. And I don't understand why free agents get such a big price break. I mean, if a pitcher is not on a team, what are you afraid they're going to go to Colorado and sign there? Like Blake Snell is not signing with the Rockies. The uncertainty of where they're going to sign should not be so much as to damage their price, right? You can ding them maybe $1 because maybe they sign with the Reds or something like that, but you're getting a very nice, healthy discount. So if you want to draft free agents, and there's a lot of them that you want to target or so, drafting early would be better. Closer prices are depressed early on, and that's because there's more uncertainty. There's more of them. There's people want to guess on people, so the guesses are cheaper. Of course, if you hit on the right one, then you get their full value, which is higher. So if you're good at guessing closers, or even if not, closer prices it's easier to put together a team with that. If you want to push more money into other things and less money into closers, if that's your strategy, drafting early would be better for you. If you have no problem taking a large stake and saying, I'm going to spend $20 or a fourth round pick on a closer, drafting later is probably better because you get more certainty. So there are advantages and disadvantages to doing each. And I want to ask you, though, Scott, because one thing I do notice as the draft season goes on, I think projections play a very big role. I think it is very influenced. But when you start in the draft season before January and projections have not come out, the market is guessing a lot, or they're doing their own thing. As the projections come out, people are relying on them more. I like to think that people use ATC, and as the market goes down, the ADP comes a little bit closer to what projections are. Smart drafters know that projections are good, so they use them. So ADP converges more to projections. What do you see in terms of the use of projections and how it affects drafts these days?
They've certainly become more and more prominent because they're better and because they're easy to get to. I mean, you go to that Fangraphs hub, you go, I want to look up what I think Tariq Scooble's going to do this year. Well, I go to his Fangraph page, and there is 5 or 6 set of projections. And one reason why the ATC projections are so good is because they're incorporating input from different sources. We've learned that aggregation is a good thing. You can smooth out so much variance, and you take out the high and the low sometimes. I know there's different versions of the ATC projections, but I believe in that concept in general, that collectively a system can be more accurate than any individual will be.
Yeah. Ruvain, any thoughts on projections?
Yeah, I think one thing when when you're drafting, if you start noticing that some people in the draft like the same people you do, or playing in the same pool of players that you are, you can get an idea that they may be using the same projection systems you're using, and sometimes that can play into how you're going to actually do the rest of your draft because you can figure those things out pretty quickly. You can say if one person keeps going in the same guy against me, I have an idea in an auction. I think he's using the same projection, so maybe you have to watch out for how projections are used by different people just because how much influence the projections have.
Yeah, no, that's true. And the price points that you want to play at auctions certainly should be influenced. We're going to talk a little bit more about players in drafts, but first, the Injury Gurus Trivia of the Week.
So we're going to be talking about players and the influence of helium players in drafts, players who are on the uptick or even on the decline. And so I have a couple of trivia questions. First of all, let's see who can get this one. Two players in spring training hit 7 home runs this spring. Who were they?
Wyatt Langford.
No.
O'Neal Cruz?
7. O'Neal Cruz is one of them.
I thought for the helium player, Langford just made so much sense. I have no idea who the other guy is.
And Kyle Stowers. Okay.
I had no idea about that guy.
One player had 8 stolen bases this spring. Who was it?
It wasn't Ellie, was it?
Nope.
I have no idea.
Dalton Varsho. Dalton Varsho had 8 stolen bases. And on the flip side, 4 players who are currently in the top 80 ADP according to NFBC struck out 20 or more times this spring. Who were they?
This shows you how much I've grinded the spring training stats.
Same here. I don't know.
Kyle Schwarber, obviously, that's an obvious one, 20
sure.
times. Ellie De La Cruz, 21 times.
I was going to say Ellie De La Cruz.
Yeah, those are two logical
And he struck out
for
2
sure.
times today, right?
Yep.
Paul Goldschmidt, 20. And Nolan Jones struck out 22 times. So when you're talking about how helium players affect the draft, Scott, do you think that do you think that players get bumped up because of spring training because of their helium? Do you think players get bumped down because of because of lack of helium during spring training? Do you think it really affects how they are drafted?
Well, when you asked the original question about the home run leader, and I immediately jumped to Langford, I think he's a helium player for a couple of different reasons. One is because he was having a really good spring. At least I remember it that way. I mean, for all I know, he could have ended spring training on a 1-for-17 stretch, and I wouldn't know it because I just don't pay that much attention to it. But to me, a helium player is a lot of times it's their performance, but also somebody who maybe makes the team a year ahead of schedule or gets a promotion in the lineup in the spring training. I mean, it can be a lot of different things. Somebody's groomed to be a closer that we didn't maybe think so several months ago. It could be a lot of different things that make somebody a helium player. In the case of Langford, he's got a pedigree. He was drafted early in his draft, and Texas obviously has a lot of young talent. Evan Carter's still a rookie as well, but I think helium can lead. It's not just, okay, this guy hit a couple of home runs, this guy stole a couple of bases. I think a lot of things can relate to a player being a helium player. I mean, obviously, we have a year with a couple of Japanese pitchers came over, and Yamamoto on the most high-profile team in baseball, he became a helium player. With Ellie, I think the helium with him was all tied to not anything he did in the spring. As you said, he was striking out a lot. But all the helium with him was what he did last year and really in the early part of the year because he hit below 200 after the All-Star break. But we know he's probably the fastest guy in the league, and he's capable of stealing a ridiculous amount of bases, and what a fun team that could be. So I guess helium, to me, has a lot of genesis to it.
How do you define helium? Because I define helium as someone who starts off at an ADP earlier in this draft season and continually rises. So like Ellie De La Cruz to me would not be a helium player. He was just a very hyped player, and his ADP had been consistent, second or third round throughout the draft. Like he was just a player that was just exciting that everybody wanted from the get-go. Wyatt Langford continually raised during the offseason. Is that a fair definition of the rise?
I think Scooble was one of those guys too, that if you drafted early, you got him a round or a round and a half later than you got him. He just became a really trendy pick in the second half of draft season.
Well, O'Neal Cruz also rose. He as he kept hitting those home runs, he started inching up slowly. Even though he's playing for the Pirates, I think spring training does affect how people draft. I mean, if you're doing a slow draft, especially if someone hits a home run or all of a sudden and you're on the clock and you see this player is available to you, sometimes that helium for just that one day can cause a player's ADP to go up.
Yeah, that's a spike. It can spike, and spring training has a big effect. Do you think, Scott, that some helium has to do with analysis around the fantasy community? That, you have one analyst talking about him, somebody else talks about him, all of a sudden their ADP rises, people see the ADP rise, and then somebody who wants the player says, well, if the player was going at 140, well, I got to pick him now at 125, and then his ADP rises more, and then somebody 2 weeks later says, wait a minute, his ADP is now up to 130, I got to pick him at 115 to get him, and it sort of snowballs. Do you think that analysts have an effect, or it's mainly just spring training?
It can be a lot of things. I think it can be market behavior. A lot of people look at NFBC, ADP behavior, and then a lot of people look at high stakes leagues. They think, okay, well, what are they doing? They think that market is more efficient. One of the trends we saw, and we saw this in expert leagues, and I think we saw it in high money leagues too, is that closers were getting pushed up. And then it's like, okay, what do I want to do? Do I want to follow that trend and take a closer a round or two earlier than I would have, or am I comfortable shopping in the middle of that market? Or am I comfortable trying to get my saves inexpensively at the draft or even during the season? And that there's no right answer to that. It's going to speak to your experience level, what your league is like. Is your league a trading league? How active is your league on waivers? How skilled is your league, and all that stuff? So, what is the right save rule of thumb? Some people say adamantly don't pay for saves, and that might be the right strategy in some leagues. Some other people will say, no, you got to get your saves on draft day, and there are some leagues where that might be the right move too. I think it's a lot of things. I think it could be expert touts. It can be market behavior. It can be somebody who did something in spring training, and not even just stats. Sometimes, Ariel, maybe some pitcher had a great outing, and there were a bunch of videos that went off on Twitter that showed he's getting a new pitch or whatever, and here he is striking out 11 guys, and that becomes a buzzy thing. And the next thing you know, his ADP rises like 7 slots in the next week.
Yeah, Pitching Ninja shows a couple of things, and there you go. Well, closers, though, you mentioned closers. I think closers are more of a draft trend this year because what I saw early in the draft season was that my statement was, closers just look a lot more stable this year than usual. In almost every situation, I could pretty much name the first in line. I can almost name the second in line. There's plenty of them. Prices were, in fact, depressed because of the quantity. But because this year, all the injuries that happened, you had Bednar had a lat scare, Devin Williams went down, Duran went down, Seawald went down, Tanner Scott looked terrible in spring training. All of a sudden, when you had a bunch of very viable closers, that just pushed the closer market even more. So to me, that was more of a draft trend for this year.
Fair. I want to mention one other thing too that was kind of popping in my mind when I was talking about helium and ADP trends and all that. And you were talking about how people draft, and I think there's always, in our minds, everybody has to solve this for themselves. There's this push and this pull between should I just be a value hound and take what the draft gives me versus the I know better. Okay, this guy's going to be great. I'm going to get him no matter what, or no matter what may be too stringent. But I really like Logan Webb this year. He's supposed to go in this round. I'll jump it by a round, or whoever that player may be for you. And I don't think with anybody it's 100% in one direction or the other, though maybe I could be wrong. Maybe for all I know, you guys could draft 100%. I would think, Ariel, you probably side on the value side
Sure.
based on the wiring of you that I know. But to me, I'm always going back and forth. And there's a part in the draft, I think, and some people like to dump on ADP, which I think is misguided because all ADP is an analysis of market behavior. And that has value. Granted, you're looking at NFBC, ADP, if you're not drafting in the NFBC, you have to take that with a grain of salt. You have to try to season that to taste to what your draft room is like. You may or may not know the people you're playing against. You and I are both in leagues with people, leagues that have existed for a while where you know the opponents and you can probably predict their behavior. And we all know what it's like to draft with people we don't know very well. And so you have to season that to taste. But I think ADP gets a little bit of a bad rap. It's just market behavior, and you're trying to leverage that. And to me, I'm I've usually been a value guy, and I've become a little bit more as I've gotten older. If I just feel really good about a player, maybe I just don't care about the ADP. That happens more in the middle and late parts of the draft. There's a point where it doesn't matter if somebody like is a 17th round player by ADP. If he's the guy I like in the 15th round and I want him, I'm just going to take him. And that's really not a big deal. You're not giving up that much if you're wrong. But I think if you're going to aggressively get your guys in the early rounds, you're flushing a lot of value down the toilet. So the bottom line is there's a sliding bar here where value hunting is on one side of it. Get your guys, I know better, is on the other side of it. And I think everybody has to decide where the bar comes down in their own drafting style.
And the last week of the drafting, the closer ADP, I think that whole closer list of ADP can basically go out the window because with all the injuries, all the middle tier closers are being drafted higher up, and no one valued them at those levels. So the ADP actually can go out the window. The closer market stayed the same, except the less reliable guys were getting pushed up to where people weren't comfortable taking them, but they had to take them because there was no other choice. So when it comes to the closers in the market, I think it's different than the other position players. Other position players, let's say the starting pitchers may come down a little bit because people are more aggressive with the closers. So you may have been able to get a better deal on a starting pitcher with for the last week. But closers was a special case because there's so many top closers who got hurt that it's just you couldn't. The ADP had to go out the window, and that's how the draft changed, like literally in the last week.
I mean, I have a few things to say about ADP. Well, first of all, ADP is a tool. It's a tool where to see your values are against market and the best places to shop. I mean, I used it to see, well, there's a bunch of places in the 11th round where there's a bunch of first basemen that I value more than the ADP. That is a spot where I probably will get a first baseman if I want, so plan for a first baseman there. It's a tool more than anything else. It's not a recipe for what to take. The other thing is ADP, as you say, Ruvain, it's not absolute in terms of the positions. I think, though, it's more of a use of relative by position. The ADP will tell you Edwin Diaz is 1, and then Hader is 2, and Clase is 3 for closers. In any one given draft or auction, they might all be depressed by $1, inflated by $1, and so on and so forth. Take catchers. I've noticed that over the years, catcher pricing has nothing to do with absolute. There are some leagues that value catcher more. There are some individual drafts that value catchers less. As long as you find the right place relative to where they go within each other, that's the best place to take them. You can have catcher runs in the 10th round, or in one league you can have catcher runs in the 14th round where everybody is not taking a catcher, right? It's relative. The other two things I'll say about ADP is that ADP is not formed by the best people in the league. It's formed by the person who takes a player in the league. And out of the people who take the players, most of them aren't winning. So if Ellie De La Cruz has a second-round ADP, Ellie De La Cruz could be the biggest bust this year, and whoever's taking him might be part of that bust and may finish last, right? It doesn't reflect the better people in the room. It reflects the consensus of maybe even the worst players at times, right? So it shouldn't be taken as gospel as what to do because it's influenced by everyone, not the smart people, right? Whereas projections, take ATC and aggregation, that's influenced by everyone and the better parts of the projections there.
I had a good laugh. I want to mention this with Ellie. I had a good laugh in the spring season over again at Baseball HQ with Patrick Davitt. They do the Boons and Baines segment, and it felt like everybody who was on that program said something negative about Ellie De La Cruz. And look, De La Cruz certainly has an upside. I mean, he's capable of stealing any number of bases you want. He's got a lot of power. I couldn't pay the ADP on him, and he was one of my fades. I gave a bunch of other fades anyway because I didn't want to just rely on that one, but it almost became a running gag that everybody who came on the show said something negative about Ellie. And I say that with no joy because baseball's more fun when Ellie De La Cruz is playing well. I mean, he's just a buoyancy to him, and he's an exciting guy. And isn't it so funny how him and O'Neill Cruz, same division, they're both shortstops who don't fit the traditional mold of what a shortstop is. They have different body types. And when you see them on the right day, man, I mean, they could be the future of baseball. You see them on the wrong day, and you realize how raw they actually are and how they're still in the early parts of their career. But it's just, I had a laugh every time I felt like I tuned into that show with Patrick Davitt, which was great. That it was the Ellie De La Cruz Bane show.
Yeah, I mean, he just terribly mispriced, in my opinion. I could be wrong. Too. You never know.
And as you point out, you make a great point. ADP is about the one guy who takes him. It's not about the 11 people.
Yeah. Exactly. The last thing I'll say about ADP, though, is since I do this study every year where I compare projections and see how projections would do in theory if they took players, I also do that with the ADP. ADP is getting better. It's getting more accurate as a reflection of doing the right price of players. It's actually outpacing getting better than projections. Projections are getting better too, by the way, but ADP is getting better at a faster rate. Yeah, the market is getting more shrewd as it goes on. So that's one thing I can tell you because I've studied this. All right, let's go on. Actually, before we do some predictions, just so that people get a sense of what we're doing as we're nearing the end of the draft season, let's go around the room and list what are our most rostered players. I'm in, 8 or 9 leagues, let's say. I don't know how many you guys are in, but who are the players you seem to be getting more often? Let's start with you, Scott.
There's a pocket in pitching where I ended up just getting a lot of the same guys. I have a lot of Logan Webb. I have a lot of George Kirby. I have a lot of Luis Castillo, where I can start my team off with a foundation of offense, but still be somewhat proactive towards pitching. I have a lot of Seiya Suzuki. I thought Lane Thomas could regress a lot from last year and still meet what I thought was a very reasonable ADP. I have a lot of him. Justin Turner covers 3 positions in Yahoo. He's going to hit cleanup for Toronto. I don't know if eventually if Joey Votto will get in the way and take some of his playing time. I hope not, but I have a lot of Turner. And it's funny how Cincinnati had too many good offensive players, not enough spots, and then it cleaned up with a suspension and a couple of injuries, and that led to me getting a lot of Spencer Steer and a lot of Jonathan India.
Yeah, those are amazingly how we said, the Reds are stupid for not trading away an infielder, and now they're smart for not trading away an infielder. For sure.
Let me just mention two other guys I want to mention really quick. Brandon Pfaadt is on a bunch of my teams. We saw him kind of put it together late last season, and he pitched well in the playoffs, and I'm a Red Sox fan, and I wasn't really feeling this team a couple months ago, and I'm, if anything, I think I'm harder on the team I root for rather than being easier on them, but I started to see the case for a lot of their starting pitchers, and it occurred to me that Cutter Crawford actually broke out last year. I still think there's room for him to jump a level, but I love that he qualifies at both starting pitcher and relief pitcher in Yahoo. I mean, last year he struck out better than a batter per inning. And although I don't know that there's really a front man for this rotation, I think there's more upside in Crawford than maybe I realized like 2 months ago.
Yeah, and the best part of Cutter Crawford is if you go on to Nick Pollock's pitcher list, and when it gives the splits by pitch, it actually spells Cutter for him with a K. So, Ruvain, how about you? Who are your most rostered players? And some of them will probably be on my list because we share a lot of teams together.
Yes. Scott, you mentioned Jonathan India. I was a big Jonathan India fan before. I thought he was going to get playing time. The team didn't trade him when they could have traded him, and they kept him on the team for a reason. So I just happened, I thought he was undervalued, and I got a lot of shares of him. And other guys who have a lot of shares of, Framber Valdez, I think he's on like 80% of my teams. Harrison Bader, I know he's starting in center field, and he's going dirt cheap, and he can get like 20 stolen bases. Really,
cheapest
really
category juice out there. He could go 20-20.
So I mean, and he's going for like in the category of $1 or $2 total. So I have him on a lot of teams. Giovanni Gallegos, I'm still nervous about Ryan Helsley. You never know. He was hurt. He came back. He was okay. Gallegos always has a good ERA and WHIP. And if I'm going to pick a middle reliever, I think I'll take him because he'll vulture some saves. Andrew Abbott, I think there's a lot of helium in him, and I think he's prone to have a good breakout season. So I think those are my main guys. I got a lot of different bullpen guys also, and just was spattering everywhere just because I wanted a little share in some of them just in case one of them hits.
Yeah, a bunch of those are on my list, like Framber Valdez and Andrew Abbott, who cheap stab this year. I thought he'd be more expensive, but he's not. I have Josh Bell on a bunch of teams like I do every year. What the heck? Alec Boehm, Ryan McMahon, those are my go-to, if available at the end, great. I have a lot of Kerry Carpenter, and actually was disappointed that he wasn't in the opening day lineup. I guess they're platooning him. He's going to be strong side platoon, but it's always wary when the guy you have a lot of shares of doesn't play opening day. Rafael Devers, he seemed to be a guy, like a second-round player that was going for end-of-second-round prices, so I've got a lot of him. Got a lot of Santander, who had a big day today. A lot of Logan O'Hoppe, just happens to be where I drafted, and I do have a lot of Tanner Scott, so I hope that works out. Yeah. All right, so that's that. Let's talk a little bit about Fab. How does the way you draft, Scott, affect the first 2 weeks or so of fab that you do?
I think the early fab periods are very important. Obviously, if you hit a player, on a player, I should say, you don't want to throw a bat at his head or anything. You hit on a player early, you can get the maximum return, and there's going to be surprising things that develop. I do not know what I actually have a fair amount of Jason Foley. I could have mentioned him as one of my most rostered players, although I didn't get him. I probably got have him maybe 20-25% of my teams, which is maybe more than a common player. But I thought maybe Alec Land could lose the job during the season. The fact that Foley got a save on opening day, I didn't see that coming, and who knows? Maybe we'll find out there's a tactical reason for that, or even an injury reason. But it's important for first thing, if you haven't drafted yet, or if you're like us, you're in a bunch of leagues, right? The first thing I got to do is I got to put everything in my calendar, everything in my phone, all the different fab cadences. I have leagues that a lot of leagues are Sunday fab. I have a couple of leagues that have 2 fab periods during the season. It's so easy to forget, and there's sometimes this year with the Padres and Dodgers opened the season in an unusual time. The cadence of the season was different. There was fab and in some case IL rules tied to that. You need to be, and I know it's not, the devil's in the details. It's not the most fun thing to talk maybe about fab strategizing as far as the actual scheduling of it, but that's something, all of our lives are crazy and dynamic. You just need to have that stuff lined out so you don't miss these periods. In fact, in one league, it happens every year. There's one league, something sneaks up on me and I miss a fab period, and then I see like 9 guys go who I wanted, and it kills me because that's just giving something away. It's like double faulting in tennis. You just gave away a point. Your opponent did nothing. They're making an error in baseball. You just gave away an extra out, and that comes back to hurt you. But I'm not. I like to think, and every league's different, but I think it's a mistake to fall in love with your bench. I remember the late great Steve Moyer would draft guys for $1 at the end of his Tout Wars roster, and he'd be like, "Well, I like this guy. I'm not cutting this. I'm giving this guy a month or a month and a half or 2 months to prove that he's worth it." And I feel like to me it's the Monty Hall problem, where you're given 3 choices. There's 3 doors. Behind one of them is a prize. Behind the other 2 is a goat, basically the meaningless door. And after they reveal, they tell you, okay, door 3 is no good. There's a goat there, so it's either door 1 or door 2. Do you want to keep your choice or change it? The counterintuitiveness of the Monty Hall problem is that once the data changes, you should actually change your choice. It seems so wrong that that's the actual right answer to it. And that's how I look at fantasy baseball. It's that all the analysis we do is great. But once you know something about the regular season, the team tips their hand with usage, or something that we didn't know during the walk-up is information known now. That's enough for me to cut somebody at the bottom of my bench. And don't cut somebody you like, but always feel like there's a fluidity at the bottom of your roster. I guess that's the way I want to describe it.
Yeah, you have to measure opportunity cost. And usually the bottom of your bench are a bunch of darts that you threw. And if you see a dart that might be a better dart or a different dart that maybe had a hot start, might be worth jumping in on. The question, I'll give it to Ruvain first. How much money should you be spending? What percentage of your budget should you be spending early? Because first of all, if you get a guy early, there's not going to be that many opportunities to get a guy that nobody saw if you don't jump right away. Also, you get him for the entire year. But of course, then, you might blow an opportunity to use it at a better defined area. Oh, you lost your closer. You need a closer. You need the money later. So what kind of spend would you do early on? It's team dependent, of course, but what's some general guidelines?
Well, for me personally, I don't like spending a lot of money early on. I just drafted my team. There was a fab this past weekend. The teams didn't. I mean, there were 2 games played. I'm not going to make any rash decisions right away. I'm not going to drop people who I still believe are going to make it. I think you should spend money on players if you know they were demoted, or if they just made the team. If you had the number 5 starter, if you didn't have Luis Gil from the Yankees, and you want him on your team, he's a guy you could have gone after because you didn't know he was going to make the roster until right before the season started. So that's the guy you'd go after. But I try to be very passive with my money very early on, only because I just drafted my team. I trust who I drafted. I trust the process of going through the draft, and I just want to hold on to him. I don't like. I mean, you're talking about Scott. You mentioned about not wanting to get rid of what you have, but I don't like getting rid of what I have right away. I mean, we just did it. Nothing that much changed to move the needle. If let's say 2 weeks into the season, maybe, but I mean, a week in, 3 days into the season, is that going to move the needle as to whether or not who I picked during my draft is that much better or that much worse than the guy who I'd pick up for $20 or $30 of fab in a $1,000 league. I don't think it's worth it. I think it's better off to hold your money, let the, as they said, let the dust settle for the season to start, and then you can make better observations and better picks later on.
See, I think a big reason why the answer to this is really it depends because it depends on so many variables, including when did you draft? Okay, like in labor, mixed league labor, we drafted, I think, February 8th or something like that. The first fab period was a good 5 or 6 weeks after that. At that point, significant things had happened. We had, and not only were we picking up guys, but we had IL spots. This is another thing with the early waiver periods. We're not just saying, hey, you cut somebody. In a lot of these leagues, you have free spots to play with because your players went on the injured list, and your league allows for, not in the NFBC, of course, but in a lot of leagues, you're allowed storage area and you're getting free pickups. So I agree with you, Ruvain. If your draft was recent, you should feel pretty good about who you picked. You picked these guys for a reason, assuming you were engaged for the whole draft. And there, I would be hesitant. I'd want more information. But if there's more of a gap, and this is why the listener has to season this to taste, because it's such a it depends answer. But in the case of labor, IL spots to play with. It's been 4 or 5 weeks. I had a lot of spring training stuff or usage and news and injuries and all different things that I could consider. So there, I'm definitely going to get into that free agent market and make some proactive moves.
Yeah, I mean, the answer, of course, is depends on your situation. But to give a little bit of guidance to the listeners who are listening in here, you need to have a budget to have for every single week, a couple dollars that some regular injury, regular hot guys, throughout the season. You need some emergency spend in case you blow your closer, major injury. You need to budget for that. And then you need to have a fund and when to use. And sometimes you need to use it earlier, and sometimes you need to use it later. The best guidance I can give you is take a look at the opportunity costs. What are you dropping? What are you giving up? What are you getting? And is it worth, or are you going to get something better? And that's really up to the person to decide. It's our predictions episode, and right before the season, well, this is opening day that we're doing this, we got to make some bold predictions for the season, as is our tradition every year. So we'll do a hitter, maybe a pitcher, and a team prediction. So let's go around the room. Without further ado, Scott, what is a bold hitter prediction you have for 2024?
I'm going to cheat a little bit because this will also include this player's defense probably, but one of my bold predictions was that Anthony Volpe will be top 10 in the American League MVP voting. And last year the category Juice played, he only hit 209, but he had a hit rate that said his average should have been, he had a batted ball profile that said his average should have been probably about 20 or 30 points higher. Walked 3 times opening day. I think eventually he'll percolate higher in that Yankee lineup. And even though it's a team I don't like, I think they were overrated for the entire spring. I couldn't believe their over-under was anywhere between 90 to 91. But Anthony Volpe is a player on the escalator, and I think he's going to be a significant profit player this year.
Nice. Moving?
I'm going to go with Vladdy Guerrero prediction here. I think he's going to revert back to 2021. I think he's going to hit over 45 home runs and hit close to 290. He's looked better, a little bit better in spring. He homered already today, and it was a bomb that he hit. His dead center field over 450 feet. It was great. So I think that he will hit over 45 home runs, and I think he'll hit around 290, which is above what our projections say. So that's my bold prediction.
It's funny, I actually do have a bold prediction which has Vladimir Guerrero will finish as the top corner infielder. So I guess I'm aligned with that. I'll give you 2 bold predictions here. One is Nico Horner will steal at least 50 bases, make it bold, and will finish as a top 6 middle infielder. The thing about Nico Horner is he's a guy that is continually undervalued. I'm thinking back to like Nelson Cruz, where no matter what projection he has, no matter what everyone values him at, he always beats that. And I think Horner is that guy. And it stems from the time that he was in the minors, where he had a bad season in the minors because he was hurt. So, that's one slab of data there. Then there was COVID, so there was no preseason, so you can't even put him there. And so he had no data or bad data, so the initial projections had him as meh. And then the next year, it still grabbed a lot of that data from the past, and it was meh, like he's Stephen Kwan. But he was much, much better than that. I mean, the dude has hit over 280 in each season the last couple of years. He stole 43 bases last year. I think he's one of these guys that he's such a high floor that he has a career strikeout rate of about 12%. He had 50 stolen bases attempts last year. I think that can go up. He was a $25 player last year. I think that can go up. I just think he's continuously undervalued. The other projection I'll make is Jonathan India. We mentioned before. He finishes as the most valuable Reds infielder. He's going to beat Ellie De La Cruz. He's going to beat Spencer Steer. He's going to beat any of the corners and Encarnacion. Remember, he was a $20 to $25 player 2 years ago, and it was just 3 years ago he was injured the last 2 years. He's got those skills, and in Roto, he steals. 2020 type player. I think he's got potential to being the best guy if he stays healthy. He's got to avoid the plantar fasciitis, and he's got to stay in the field. But if he's there, I think he's the guy. And any other predictions?
I want to mention you talked about Horner.
Yeah.
I love players who are good at things. Bill James said a million years ago, it was a piece about Dwight Evans, who he thought was an MVP deserving player. And as a Red Sox fan, I agree. Dwight Evans was good at a lot of things. And he said players that are good at a lot of things are often underrated. Players who are specialists are often overrated. And what is Nico Horner good at, right? Last year he gave you a plus average for fantasy. And it's for career 279 average, which is really good in today's game. Last year he scored 98 runs. What runs scored are generally not as sexy to people as RBIs, even though they're both the production of a run. But I love players who are either boring veterans or good at broad things or good at maybe some of the unsexy categories. I feel like you're forever getting a value on those guys. And I'm in on the Cubs anyway. I think they're clearly the best team in that division. My friend Joe Sheehan has the Cubs going to the World Series. I'm not going to go that far, but I think the Cubs are going to be a heck of a team this year. And Horner, I love players who he's also a very good defender, which marks his territory on the field. He could have stayed at shortstop, but I don't blame them for getting Dansby Swanson, who's also a plus defender. Another reason to get Cubs pitchers. They have a really good infield. But I love players who are good at different things, broad skills, and maybe checking the boxes in those categories that aren't so sexy.
Many paths to value. And I mentioned on our show last week that whether you buy him at a little bit of an overpay as compared to projections, it's worth it for him because when you draft, you want to be more flexible as you go down, right? What is cheap later? Homers and power. Kyle Schwarber is undervalued. Jake Berger is undervalued. All the guys who do the homer and powers, they're undervalued. So what do you need to get early to facilitate possible bargains later is you need a guy who's good at batting average, runs, and stolen bases. Well, who in the 4th, 5th round is going to do that? Nico Horner. You pick him. You're balanced categorically for the rest of the draft. You can get value where you take it. You don't got to reach for categories. It makes it so much easier to draft. And even if you think that he's around too early, worth it because it's about team construct, not just about the actual value of players when you're picking in early rounds.
There's the tip in there that really screamed out to me and spoke to me, and I want people to consider this with the next fantasy draft they do, whatever sport you're doing it in. Ask yourself before you draft, what can I get probably in the middle of my draft? What can I get probably at the end of my draft? What can I get probably in free agency? And that should influence your early decisions. You want to allow for what you think the market will allow you to do later in the draft. That's going to influence how you approach the early part of your draft. You have to consider those things before you even start the exercise.
Exactly. That's exactly the way to do that. Let's do pitchers. Let's start with Ruvain this time. Ruvain, what is one pitcher prediction you have for 2024?
Okay, I have a general prediction, and I have a single player bold prediction, and that's with Luis Severino. I think he will be the NL Comeback Player of the Year. He is healthy. He wasn't healthy at all last year. He was still pitching injured. He was still coming back from Tommy John. He wasn't 100%. He was in a different team, same market, but different team, so he knows how to pitch in New York. We know that. So I think he's going to have a bounce-back year, and I think he'll win NL Comeback Player of the Year. And my bold prediction for pitchers in general, because of all the injuries and because how short pitchers pitch nowadays, less than 5 innings, sometimes 6 innings, I don't think there will be a 20-game winner this year. I think because of all those reasons, I don't think that a pitcher will be lucky enough to get to that 20-win plateau.
Yeah, I think that is likely, or at least it's not so far bold. I don't know if that's the expected, but it's not. It's very easy to conceive that. All right, Scott.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not picking on Rouvain. I think he just said something that's sharp about wins. I don't know how bold it is. I think it's more an astute observation of the trend. Now, I will swim against that current, wind up drowning. But one of my bold predictions I've given out this year is that I think Logan Webb is going to win 18 to 20 games. He hurt me by not getting a win on Thursday, even though he pitched a quality start, 6 innings, 2 runs. I've started to gravitate towards these pitchers who don't maybe throw as hard as some of the other pitchers in the league who are considered the Cy Young candidates and stuff like that. But they're good with control. They'll get strikeouts through volume. In the case of the Giants, they just had Matt Chapman, who was already a good infield, especially left side of the infield defensively. I think guys like Logan Webb wasn't cheap by any means, and George Kirby isn't cheap and stuff like that. But there are some people who don't want to draft players like that because, like, no, his strikeout rate's not as good enough. You got to look at the strikeout / walk rate. Whether you go by percentages or you just go by the raw counting totals. I want guys who can give me length, who can go deep in a game, who can throw 7 innings where a win is more likely, and they don't have to come out after 5 because they've thrown a million pitches. Somehow, I don't know how Blake Snell won the Cy Young Award leading the major leagues in walks, but that happened. I think of Blake Snell, great pitcher. He's the classic 5 1/3 guy. I never expect him to go anywhere close to deep in a game, where Webb, maybe today he would have gone another inning if it was later in the season. I think he was in the high 90s in pitches. He only had 11 wins last year. I think he could easily be somebody who leads the major league in wins. Maybe that might be 15 or 16, as we all see the win vanishing. Because teams don't even. It used to be that nobody with a lead would ever get taken out in the first 5 innings. They'd feel like it's a slap in the face of the pitcher. Teams don't care about it anymore. They've learned how to handle those situations, and they do what's best for the team, and the pitcher just has to deal with it. But bottom line, I want guys who good park, winning environment. I can see them going deep in games. That's where wins come from. So I think Logan Webb is going to surprise people and win a lot more games than the 11 he had last year. And I said 18 to 20 to quote unquote make it bold, but if you just want to say he leads the National League in wins or he wins the Cy Young Award, anything like that, I would sign off on.
Chris Bassett comes to mind.
Love it. I love Chris Bassett. And I know you gave him out on HQ, if I remember. And I was thinking, yep, I'm on the same page with Ariel on that one.
He averaged pitching into the seventh last year. The Mets signed Verlander. They should have signed Bassett again. That was very, very funny.
Much better value too, right?
Yeah.
Although at least the Mets were able to give away their mistakes. I mean, it's funny. Scherzer and Verlander were on that team for like 10 minutes, it felt like.
Well, Verlander did come with Kate Upton, but they still should have signed Chris Bassett, is the story. And I did bump into Kate Upton last year, so that did make my experience a little bit better in Citi
the last
Field.
time I saw Kate, she told me she had bumped into you. So
okay.
The story checks out. Story checks out.
All right, there you go. My pitcher prediction, here we go with this one. Shota Imanaga will out-earn Yoshinobu Yamamoto.
Love it.
Yeah. I don't understand we talked about Ellie Cruz. I don't understand the price on Yamamoto. Yamamoto currently major league wins has the same number as Ariel Cohen has wins in the major leagues, which is 0. He hasn't done it in the major leagues. I understand he's obviously going to do better than me, but I'm not so sure that he's going to be this fantastic ace pitcher. He very well could turn into a pumpkin. I don't think so. ATC projections have him as a $21 player, but Imanaga we have as an $11 player. And here's the thing about projections that I see. I get to see the variance between projections. There are no two pitchers that there's a bigger variance in terms of how projections go than Yamamoto and Imanaga, and that's because we just don't know enough. Now, Kodai Senga translated very, very well into the majors other than the walks. He walked a lot last year, but we don't know how they're going to translate. And it's very possible that Imanaga might have the right aptitude for the majors over Yamamoto. His stuff may not work as much. The other thing I see about projections is some skew. So is there a projection that's high that's skewing the average, or is there projection low that's pulling it down, that maybe if I didn't include that in the ATC average would be higher? Well, Yamamoto is skewed positive and Imanaga is skewed negative. And I found that skew tells you a lot about averages. And I favor, and I've shown that anyone with a negative skew with a significant negative skew is actually meaningful, and a positive skew is meaningful in a bad way. So Imanaga has some upside. Yamamoto, to me, has more downside than anything. And by the way, just the projected statistics aren't that far from each other when you look at the peripherals. I have Yamamoto as a K minus BB of 19.5 versus Imanaga at 17.5. It's not that different. K rate of 26 versus 24.5. Not that different. I don't know that there's that much of a difference between the two. So I don't think it's all that bold, but because of the way they're being drafted, I'll call it bold. I think that Imanaga has a very good shot to out-earn Yamamoto. Not in money, because he got a bigger contract, but in fantasy value for this coming year.
Love that so much. In the last 7 days of Yahoo ADP, I believe Yamamoto was around Yahoo ADP 42, Imanaga a Yahoo ADP of 156. You can see the huge gap there.
Yeah.
Where even if it's just a matter of they're closer together than the market perceives, your money's going so much further on Imanaga. He's also an older pitcher, which maybe he's more ready for this change. He's left-handed. He hides the ball really well. My podcast partner over at Roto World, Eric Samulski, I think gave the exact same bold prediction that Imanaga would outproduce Yamamoto in their first season. So when you're looking at that 110 or so pick ADP gap, obviously your mileage will vary depending on what platform you play on. And Imanaga has come up. I mean, he was going a couple of rounds later. So I don't know if I call him a helium player, but at least his ADP is on the rise. But you mentioned just the error bars are wide in these guys. The projection gaps are wider. And with all that volatility and variance thrown in, that actually makes me just want to take the player who's going later because we don't know so much. We know they're both coveted for sure. As you said, Senga did have a good season last year, a little bit wild with the walks. He was going to be one of my rostered players had he not been hurt. And it really hurt in one of my keeper leagues that we wanted to keep him. We had to throw him back because there was too much uncertainty there. Just injured pitchers, I run away from them like the plague. Because I often say, you're the actuary, but I often say it's no fun to play fantasy baseball like an actuary because you have to face some hard truth sometimes, and injured pitchers are a lot of that hard truth. But yeah, your call of Imanaga being the Japanese pitcher to target, I think, is a great one.
And I remember how long it took Senga to customize himself to the major leagues. Yamamoto, he is younger, so he may be quote unquote a little bit more immature. Senga's an older pitcher. He was able to figure out how to do it. The Mets were accommodating for him. They did a 6-man rotation right out of the gate. You don't know what's going to happen with either Imamaga or with Yamamoto. So they're both question marks coming into the season. Yes, there's more pedigree coming from Yamamoto, but still, you don't know how that's going to translate in the major leagues until you see them for at least 1 to 2 months into the season.
Yeah, and the point that I make a lot on this show is that there's two ways to get a good return on investment. You either have to have a very good return or a low investment. So when you have a low enough investment, that helps, and that's often a bigger driver than the actual upside. So Imanaga would be the better play this year. Regardless of whether he finishes ahead, he will have the better return, in my opinion. Let's do team predictions. Let's start with you, Scott. What is a team prediction that you would have for this year?
Well, they did get a win on opening day, a nice comeback win against the Astros, but I have the Yankees finishing dramatically under their win projection, which was, again, 90.5, 91.5, in that range. I think that's crazy. I think they could I think they're more likely to be the worst team in the American League East than the best team. It's a very old team. You could argue there's really 3 centerpiece players on this team, Soto, Judge, and Cole. We don't know for sure if Garrett Cole will throw a pitch this year. Judge is already dinged up. I don't like his body type in center field. I don't really think they want to play him in center field. I think they're doing it because they have to. This lineup right now, back 9 for Stanton, back 9 for Rizzo, back 9 for LeMahieu, he's hurt. They have a couple guys at the bottom line who really can't hit. Even though I am really in on Anthony Volpe this year. I talked about him earlier as one of my bold predictions. And I think eventually he'll percolate near the top of the lineup. He's not the 209 hitter he was last year. But this rotation, you trust. Cortez kind of shaky today. I don't trust Carlos Rodon as far as I can throw him. Marcus Stroman's okay. It's just a gaping hole without Cole. And any team you take away their ace starter, they're going to look a lot different. But I think people the Yankees is the name brand. And people also assume that they have all this money and they'll just annex whoever they want and they'll make they probably should sign Jordan Montgomery. They don't want to take on more salary and have to give up stuff with luxury thresholds and everything. I think the mindset of this team is different. And I'll mention Joe Sheehan again, big Yankee fan, by the way. He not only thinks the Yankees are going to be a disappointment, he thinks they may plausibly be sellers at the trade deadline and more likely to be sellers than buyers. How many times have we ever said that about a Yankee team? I know. One game looked good today, nice comeback, but I think this has like 83-79 or 80-82 written all over it. They're not going to scare their win total. I think there's a lot of wrong answers on this team this year.
Yeah. Well, if that's true, then they have to re-sign Soto. Otherwise, that acquisition looks really bad.
For sure.
All right, Ruvain, what about your team prediction?
I have two NL Central teams making the playoffs. I have the Cardinals and the Cubs both making the playoffs. I think the Cubs just missed it. I mean, Justin Steele just got injured already. He hurt his hamstring. We don't know how long he's going to be out, but hamstring injuries usually, talking about 4 to 6 weeks, sometimes up to 8 weeks. That's a big blow to them. But that division beyond them, I mean, the Reds, they're question marks. You don't know how well their starting rotation is going to be. The Brewers looks like they're sellers. The Pirates are the Pirates. So based on those reasons alone, I think the Cubs have a great chance of making the playoffs. I think the Cardinals are going to bounce back. So I think those two teams are the teams to look for. I think the National League East, we may get one playoff team, you may get two tops, and I think the American League West also. You don't know how well the Diamondbacks are going to bounce back. If they're going to be the exact same way they played last year. They had a lot of luck last year. Also, they were a good team, but they also had a lot of luck. So I think it's a bold prediction that the Cubs and the Cardinals both make the playoffs.
So I'm going to go to the AL Central. And I'll be bold, so I'll say they'll win a division. But I have the Kansas City Royals, bold prediction, to win the AL Central. According to Fangraph's ATC projections, they have a 15% chance of making the playoffs and just an 8.4% of winning the division. So this is definitely bold. And I think it's a combination of they have some upside on their team and they have some contention, and there's a lot of uncertainty around the rest of the division. I mean, the Twins, they're only projected to win a division with 85 expected wins, so that's not much. And the Twins have a lot of health issues. They just all over the place. Their closer is down. Byron Buxton is on the team. That's a health issue. Kirilloff, you name it, there's health issues. So I don't know. Can they stay healthy? Tigers, will they be able to hold leads? Is their bullpen any good? Is their rotation depth any good? I don't know. Is their young offense legit? It's hard to tell. The Guardians, they have trouble scoring runs. That lineup, frankly, actually stinks. Are their starters going to stay healthy? You got to rely on Shane Bieber. And what happens if they don't do well? They're going to sell off stuff really quickly. And the White Sox, they just flat out stink. So there's a lot of room. And look at Kansas City. They've got a superstar in Bobby Witt. They've got NJ Melendez on the rise. They've got a superstar catcher. Vinny P has got great plate skills. They've got a lot of skills with Isbell. They've got Renfroe, who's a major league bat power guy. Look at their pitching. They've got Cole Reagans. He could be a star. They've got a lot of veterans who know what to do, especially in that park. You got Michael Wacha, Seth Lugo, and, of course, the main reason is, look who they got in the offseason, Will Smith, who has won the World Series in the last 3 years in a row. So that's my prediction. Kansas City Royals will win the division.
I lined up with a lot of what you said. Minnesota, all the injury cases on that team, guys already hurt. Byron Buxton's like Giancarlo Stanton right now. We'd all love to see a full season. It's just you would never pick it. Kirilloff, as you mentioned, has been hurt a lot. Correa's had trouble staying healthy. He had a good opener today, but I think he's been overrated significantly for a few years now. I love picking against Minnesota. My pick would be Detroit. I love Skubal. I don't think they have a lot of candidates of guys who could have bounce back seasons. It seems like Mize is finally healthy. It seems like maybe Flaherty is healthy. Collectively, maybe they're all bad bets, but you only need a couple of those guys to pop. I'm a big Riley Green fan. I think Torkelson put things together around midway through last year. He has a lot of pedigree. I think could easily hit 35 or 40 home runs. 85 wins would go a long way in this division. As you said, that's about what Minnesota's projected to get. And also that Guardians lineup, man. If
Terrible.
People talk about, who are you fading, right? I faded Jose Ramirez. He's not even on my board, really, where he goes. And why? He's a good player, of course, but he's on the back nine of his career, maybe the 11th hole, but he's back nine. And your early picks should excite you. You should take a guy and say, I can't wait to watch this guy play. I can't wait to buy the baseball package and watch. I don't want to watch the baseball package and watch Jose Ramirez bat with nobody on base all season and watch them play 3-2 and 2-1 and 4-2 games. I hate their lineup. It makes my eyes bleed. So I can't take Jose Ramirez. It's not his fault. You need good people around you. You need people to knock
just
in.
80 RBIs last year for Jose
I know.
Ramirez.
I know. So I'm out on Jose Ramirez. I think the Twins are ripe to be plucked. Maybe it's, as you said, the White Sox are nowhere near contention. It's not going to be them. You picked Kansas City, which is bold, and I admire the gutsiness to it. To me, my I didn't include it, but my bold prediction was that Detroit will win the division, and maybe they'll win it, by 6 or 7 games. I really feel this Detroit team.
I agree. Detroit is. I think Detroit has a lot of good parts. They just have to put it together, and the pitching has to stay healthy. I've been a big Riley Green fan. He's really good. He gives you that the average. He gets on base. He's a reliable center fielder. You need that. You need defense off the middle. That he gives it to you. I think Jake Rogers is one of the most underrated catchers out there. He got a little bit lucky last year with his home runs. He did hit 20 home runs, but a lot of them were like toward the end of the season in 1 month. We got a little bit lucky, but he's got that great mustache. I think that plays into it a little bit. But if you look at the division, you don't need to be that much over 500, like you guys are saying, to win the division. Tigers can just hang around. They can be buyers at the deadline, and they can make an acquisition using some of their prospects they have in their minors, and that can put them over the top.
Yeah. No,
and if you're looking to stream this year, go after this division, man. This is your soft pillow. Most of these teams, even the teams I like in this division, I feel like half the lineup's good and half of the lineup isn't good. I'm gonna be. There's gonna be a lot of streaming picks where I'm just ganging up on the AL Central.
Any other bold predictions? Could be hitter, pitcher, anything else anybody wants to say?
Yeah, I got one, and this is going to be extremely bold. Both the Mets and the Yankees are going to underachieve, and both Juan Soto and Pete Alonso will get traded this year. Okay, they're both in contract years. Soto, if the Yankees are really bombing, he is their best trade chip they have. Okay, he's going to go to the highest buyer anywhere wherever he goes to the end of the season, doesn't matter. And same thing with Pete Alonso. He has Scott Boras as an agent. If he resigns with the Mets, I'd love that. That's great. But it's, is it realistic? I guess. I mean, Steve Cohen has plenty of money, and we all understand that. But it's a business, and if they can get something back for both of these guys, if both of these teams underachieve, I think both of those guys can be traded during the season.
I'll give you a bold prediction that ties into this. Pardon me, Ariel.
Yeah.
How about Mike Trout getting traded? Somehow the Angels, this was a really neat trick. They had Trout and Ohtani together for 6 seasons, and I realized Ohtani had some injuries in there, and Trout has become more of an injury concern, right? For sure. But 6 seasons together, they never had a winning, forget making the playoffs, they never had a winning record. And Trout said to this team, come on, let's do something. Okay, you couldn't keep Ohtani. Maybe he just didn't want to stay. Maybe he was unsignable. Maybe they could have offered him the moon and the stars. It wouldn't have happened. But they didn't bring anything in of significance. And I think Trout, he's a team guy. He's a soldier, and I don't think he's going to rock the boat. But maybe he quietly says, "Okay, guys, I've been the good guy here. I've played 3 playoff games my whole career. Can we try something different?" Maybe the organization says, "Okay, you know what? We'll take care of you." Mike Trout's on a different team in the second half of the year.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I'm going to piggyback on Ruvain. I will say that the home run leader on the New York Mets this year will be Francisco Alvarez.
Wow, love it.
I think, look at him in spring. He's hitting these towering, massive homers. His body looks locked in, and what really impressed me is his defense. He's thrown out, I think, 5 out of 8 base runners so far.
It wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad last year. I thought it was going to be terrible, and it wasn't.
No, he wasn't that bad, and he got so good this year. And one of them that he didn't throw out was the one that Lindor sort of, quote, blocked second base. Even though he did the ball beat him and he tagged him, but he was called for interference. By the way, I don't know how that rule's going to play out. That's going to be a wreck of a rule this year. That's a different story. But if that happens and Alonso's out and he comes up, he might be a 35 home run hitter. And Alonso could get cold, could get traded. I don't think Lindor is going to go 30-30 once again. He looks primed, and he's the main catcher. He is ready to go. He's going to have a breakout season. So Francisco Alvarez leads the Mets in home runs.
The only thing I don't like about that prediction, I love it. We're talking about an ascending talent. As you said last year, the power showed, the defense. I was afraid to be a horse show. It wasn't. He was a capable defender, and he looks even better this year in that department. I only wish the DH spot were open for him to pick up some playing time.
Yeah, I thought about that.
Yeah, but now that they've added JD Martinez, that's obviously out the window. Maybe it was out the window anyway. But so I just feel like there's a cap, there's a ceiling cap on Alvarez's playing time because teams are smart about their catchers. They used to not be. I mean, Johnny Bench would have seasons with the Reds where he'd catch 156 games because Sparky Anderson just didn't care. or all those seasons where Pudge Rodriguez would catch all those games in the Texas Heat. I don't know how he got through that, because I went to a game in Texas, and I know you're going there soon for the Eclipse and everything, and to catch a hockey game as well. But I mean, that used to be you go to a park, you go to a game out there, even at night, it was just so incredibly humid. But Alvarez, a player on the rise. I don't think I have any shares of him this year. It's killing me. We let him get away in a league that's a keeper league, and my partner is still killing me about it. He is a Mets fan. And yeah, Alvarez, I think it's a deep catcher pool. That's why you probably have different people you like. Mitch Garver's a guy I've been drafting because he's going to be mostly a DH for Seattle, and I love a non-catcher catcher. But Alvarez, to me, even if he doesn't lead the Mets in homers, I think 30 plus looks like a very good bet.
Let's do the awards predictions. Who do you guys have for MVP? Scott?
Yeah, a lot of different ways I could go with this. Now, MVP is one award where narrative and team success is a little bit of a part of it. Like Bobby Witt could have an unbelievable season if the Royals win 69 games. I think it'd be hard for him to win the MVP unless he's so, he'd have to be like Ohtani, where he's so head and shoulders above everybody else that they're going to shrug and give it to him. So I have to ask myself, who's going to have a winning season? Who's going to be in the playoffs? And I ultimately looked at a couple of guys on the Astros. I love Yordan Alvarez. I think he's maybe the best hitter in baseball. But Kyle Tucker does more things well. And finally, and I liked Dusty Baker. I think he's a good guy and baseball lifer and a player and a manager I've always respected. But it's just nice that Kyle Tucker is no longer batting in the bottom half of that lineup. That was always a joke. He's ready to have a career season. And I don't think the odds are all that great on it, but I'm happy to pick Kyle Tucker as my AL MVP.
And NL?
National League. Mookie Betts, shortstop, glamour team. They're going to win in 6 games. You worry about the players splitting votes because Freeman is such a monster and Ohtani's going to have a huge season. But I think the timing's right for Mookie to bag a second MVP.
I'm going to go chalk on NL and say Acuna, and I'm going to go with Juan Soto. I'm assuming for this he's not going to get traded, but who the heck knows? Or not traded to an NL team, that is. So I'll go Juan Soto. I'll be very chalky this year. Ruvain?
I agree with Scott. I think Mookie Betts gets it this year. I think he's just head and shoulders probably the best, the complete player currently on the Dodgers team. I know Freddie Freeman's great defensively, but his defense, he is getting older. He's not going to have the same range. And playing shortstop, that Dodger infield looks so bad during spring training. Mookie Betts needs to step it up, and I think he will. And I think that's what's going to make him become the MVP of the National League and the American League. Regardless of how the team does, I think that Arson Judge is going to win the AL MVP. I think he's going to have a bounce back year. I think the Yankees are going to coddle him enough where he's able to play enough DH and not grind them through center field as much as they're saying that they will. Because I think they can we have some moving parts there. They have other people who can play center field, so you may see him in other positions, DH a little bit. If he can get his 500, 550, even 600 at bats, he will be the MVP of the American League.
One thing you said, Ruvain, that I hope people realize: the Dodgers is the team that has everything, right? They got the lineup, they got the pitching, they got the money. They do not have the defense. It's not a good defensive team.
Nope, not at all.
Just make sure if you got the Tyler Glasnow shares or the Yamamoto share, what a fascinating rotation too, because they have so many wait for it guys. When does Walker Buehler come back? When does Clayton Kershaw come back? How many innings can we expect from Glasnow, who I think was major league high is 120 last year? But Kershaw led the team with like 130 innings or something like that. So they know they're already like 1 foot in the playoffs anyway. But just be careful when it's time for Dodger baseball. When the ball's in play, it's going to be a carnival show.
And they can also trade for another pitcher midseason, which they commonly do. So you never know with them. Cy Young, I'm going to start out. I got Spencer Strider. I don't see any other way in the NL. American League, I like Kevin Gausman. I think that he always performs well. He was one of the top 2 or 3 in the Cy Young voting last year, and I think he makes the hump. I think that if you bought him when he had the injury scare, you got a nice little discount this year because I think he's going to be just fine. Scott?
I mean, if my mortgage depended on it, I'd have to pick Strider, but I'm so in on Logan Webb. He's going to be my National League Cy Young pick, and I could pick a bunch of different pitchers in the American League West. I did talk about Skubal briefly with the Tigers. The AL Central is going to be pillow landings, and Corbin Burns is going to love that team around him and that left field. He was pitching in a homer park. He's not there anymore, but there's so many pitchers I love in the AL West, especially those Seattle guys. So I could go Kirby or Castillo would make sense for me. I'm going to lean Castillo, but I wouldn't be surprised if Kirby made a pitch too.
All right, move it.
I got Corbin Burns in the American League. I mean, this is before what we saw he did on opening day already. I think he's in the perfect spot, the perfect place, the perfect team. That team's gonna win close to 95, 100 games, even possibly more than that. And he's gonna be the centerpiece. He's gonna be their ace. He's the missing piece they needed to get over the hump and get into the World Series. And for the National League, I think Zach Wheeler will finally break through and do it. I mean, he's been close a couple of times. He's been second. He's been third. He's been, a couple. He got this. He's a Philly for life. He's comfortable there. I think all the injuries for him are in the past. I think this is the year that he finally becomes the NL Cy Young Award winner.
Right back to you, Ruvain. Rookie of the Years.
Wyatt Langford. How can I say no? There are no other real rookies in the American League that stand out. And I also think in the National League, I think Jackson Chourio, just because he's going to get the playing time. He's going to get the most playing time. He's going to have some growing pains when he first starts out. But I think that because he's going to be playing every day and because he's playing in not a great position, he gets to face the Pirates a whole bunch of times. The pitching, I mean, the Cardinals pitching is suspect, even though I think they're going to make the playoffs. The Cardinals pitching is suspect. I think the Cardinals are going to have to outscore teams to win, which they probably will. So I think Jackson Chourio is probably going to be the NL Rookie of the Year.
Scott.
I would love to pick Jackson Holiday, but the fact that we don't know when he's coming up, and when he does come up, it'll probably be one of these. We don't want to put pressure on you. Here, you're batting eighth, even though he's not the eighth best hitter on that offense. So I have to pick one of the Rangers. I do think I'm seeing a lot of people, who are they picking? It's like Langford. Carter was so good at the end of last year and in the playoffs, and I know he was buried in the lineup today against the lefty, but I think Langford and Carter is kind of like a dead heat. I'll pick Langford. I'd have no problem picking Carter. And I'm sure if Holiday came up in April, I'd be like, "Oh, I want my pick back. I want to pick him." But it's a fun year for rookies, and there's some teams in Baltimore and Texas specifically. It's just crazy how much young talent they have. Should these Japanese pitchers be eligible? I mean, we know they are, and they can win it. And I love getting more talent in America, and I'm all for Yamamoto and Imanaga playing here. Should they be eligible for an award like this? I'm not sure they should be, but I think one of the Japanese pitchers will wind up being the Rookie of the Year. I think it's probably, again, maybe closer between Imanaga and Yamamoto than people realize, kind of like a Carter Langford situation. I also can't blame anybody who picks Jackson Chourio. To go on record, let's pick Langford. I know it's the chalk, but let's pick Langford, and I'll pick Imanaga in the National League.
Yeah, so I have the same thought as you in the AL. It's either Langford or Evan Carter. Langford's going to be better for fantasy, I think, because of the steals and roto. Evan Carter may be better defensively, so maybe he is in an MVP type Rookie of the Year, maybe a little bit more. I'll go with Langford, but it's really between the two. And I'm going to say that whatever happens, shouldn't there be a Jackson somebody that wins the Rookie of the Year? You got Jackson Chourio, Jackson Holiday. I'll actually throw another Jackson. How about Jackson Merrill for Rookie of the Year in the NL? He's already been there. The thing is that there haven't been a lot of very young, like under 20 center fielders to start on opening day. The ones that come to mind are, we're talking Ken Griffey Jr., Andrew Jones, and there's Jackson Merrill. So I think there's some bright future for him. I'll go with Jackson Merrill over the pitchers in the NL Rookie of the Year.
My colleague at Yahoo, Jake Mintz, did a great piece about players who are going to impact the season. And actually, not just players, but people in baseball. They had some owners and some people who are tangentially tied to the game. And he had a point about all these young players named Jackson, and I'm trying to call it up. Okay, so before the Soul Series, only 5. This is Jake Mintz article from Yahoo. Only 5 players in Major League Baseball history had sported the first name Jackson, and now the number is going to go to 8 because of Jackson Merrill, because of Jackson Chourio, because of Jackson Holiday. So obviously, the hot baby name 20 years ago was Jackson.
Yeah. All baseball players on a path. So
Yep.
It's funny, and I have to tell you, I get confused sometimes when I'm talking. Which Jackson am I talking about here?
I had that problem a few years ago. The Angels had a team where everybody had a Beverly Hills 90210 name, and I had trouble differentiating the difference between like 3 guys because they all had like the same prep school name. Taylor Ward and Jared Walsh, and I'm like, yeah, these guys were all on a TV show. They're not real people.
yeah. There you go. Let's quickly do the pennant and World Series winners. Scott, who do you got going to the World Series and winning it?
Yeah, on record, chalk, chalk, chalk. Dodgers over the Rangers. The spirit animal World Series I would love to see. Cubs over the Tigers.
Okay, Ruvain.
I have the Braves and the Orioles in the World Series, with the Orioles winning for the first time since 1983.
I'll go with the Astros over the Braves. The Astros have a good tendency to get into the AL Championship Series and very often over it. And they do add pieces as needed, and they've got a great base. And the Braves just Alex Anthopoulos is a master. And
Yeah, Ruvain, you picked the Orioles to win it, and I would really like to see, R.I.P. Peter Angelos. We know they just switched ownership. I feel like they're a pitcher short, but in the position they're in, with all the resources they have, I would love to see them go out. And you don't know who's going to be on the market. And it seems like every year there's less and less pitching to go out and get. But we know there's a lot of really good pitchers who are on short contracts. I would love to see them get a co-number one or a number two before the playoffs start, because that's the one thing I don't think they have. Their lineup, especially if all the guys come up, their everyday lineup is just going to be ridiculous. They're set up to be great for like the next 5 or 6 years, but I think they need that one more pitcher to be relevant in the postseason. I'm curious to go get it. I also want to mention that last year Arizona makes the World Series, outscored in the regular season. I mean, they're a fun team, and I like Corbin Carroll, and I think Brandon Pfaadt's going to be a breakout player this year and all that. But this year, I'd like to see the overdogs get their revenge. I mean, last year the Braves and Dodgers had historic seasons, and they were eliminated in 15 seconds. This year, I'd like to see a World Series where two teams that won 100-plus games actually make it. And I'm thinking, I have to have a feeling we're going to get that. I know the playoffs are full of variance, and their tournaments, they're not made to determine who the best team is. It's made to determine who wins a playoff, who wins a tournament in October. And I'm okay with that. But this year, I'd like to see a team that dominates for 6 months get rewarded at the end of the season.
Yeah, that would be a little bit different than we've seen in the past, but make a lot of sense. I'll give you a trade prediction for the Orioles. Orioles will trade and get Emmanuel Clase sometime midseason. I mean, they're going to trade Clase from the Indians and the Guardians. I'm still not used to that. And who's their closer? Kimbrel.
Yeah, hard to trust.
Hard to trust. I think they like Cano in a high leverage role. I can see that happening. All right, well, quick injury update, Ruvain, and it's been a couple of hours, but we already got one guy rolling on the floor with his hamstring. What do you got?
Yes, Justin Steele. He injured his left hamstring. It looks like he injured his left hamstring while fielding a bunt. He was able to get off the field on his own power, but he was limping. If it was really, really bad and completely torn, he probably wouldn't be able to walk at all. So this is looking at, and this is prior to any testing. I'd probably say anywhere between a 4 to 6 week injury. I mentioned that before. It can be up to 8 weeks if it's a really severe sprain. If it's a tear, it can be even worse. But hopefully it's not. Royce Lewis injured himself running from second to third. It looked like he also had either a quad or a hamstring injury. To me, it looked like it's more of a quad injury, the way he was walking.
Another twin.
Another twin. They always stay healthy, especially Royce Lewis. We'll see what comes from that, but that can be a couple weeks as well. I have to mention the closers again because they're all injured. Devin Williams, he's out. The guys who you can look to pick up if they're still available: Joel Payampas, Abner Uribe, or they're going to go by committee, and the cream will come to the top, and whoever gets to become closer, that's going to be it. Griffin Jacks, pick him up for a while because John Duran is going to be out for a while with an oblique injury. Jordan Romano is starting on the IL with right elbow inflammation. Eric Swanson's on the IL also. So Chad Green, Yimi Garcia. I don't know who's going to close for the Blue Jays. That doesn't look that great. Paul Sewald is out with an oblique injury. He has a grade 2, which means he can miss up to 2 months. If Kevin Ginkel is still available, he's already been told that he's going to get most saved situations, so look at him. TJ Friedel has a fractured right wrist. He should be reassessed in the next couple of weeks. He's on the IL. If he heals well, he should be back by the end of April. Will Benson, who I think batted second in the lineup today, is going to be probably platooning a little bit with Stuart Fairchild. Stuart Fairchild does give you a little speed, but he doesn't get that much average. DJ LeMahieu, one of the old guys on the Yankees, already on the IL with a right foot bone bruise and inflammation. They don't know when he's going to come back. But John Birdie, if he's available in your league, pick him up. He's going to start a lot. He didn't start today in opening day because of airline issues. That's a different story. Matt McClain, he was diagnosed with damage in his cartilage in his left shoulder. He went for a second opinion, and before we even knew it, he had shoulder surgery, which opened the door for Jonathan India, so he's available. Grab him. Tommy Edmond. I'm going to end with Tommy Edmond. He had wrist surgery this past October. He's starting on season on the IL. This is something that can linger throughout the entire season. He's still able to do defensive drills. He's throwing, but shut down from swinging. Dylan Carlson was supposed to replace him, but he got hurt, which made room for Victor Scott and Alec Burleson. So just Alec Burleson is going to get some DHing for the Cardinals. He's looked pretty good in spring, so he's probably more available than Victor Scott, but those two guys should be available in most leagues.
So 2 quick points. First of all, how about that Reds lineup today? They look absolutely smashing. Other thing is, I did not draft him all that much, but I fabbed him everywhere. John Birdie. I had a conversation with Craig Mish, who covers the Marlins.
So good.
Yeah, he's great. Birdie only stole 16 bases last year, and he had his most plate appearances ever. And that was after 41 the year before, and that was with the change in the bases and everything. And he batted .294 last year with almost a .350 OBP. How in the world did he only steal 16 bases? Makes no sense at all. And Mish just said he was injured. That's it. He's not injured anymore. He's now going to a Yankees team that I think would steal a little bit. He can steal 40 bases for you this year. He's free everywhere, even in 15-team leagues. Go out and get John Birdie. If I'm wrong, then you drop him the following week. It's a very, very big waiver wire pick, I think, that everyone should be thinking of. And he qualifies at short and third base, so very good flexibility positionally wise.
Yes.
I love that. And again, I just want to piggyback on Craig Mish. He is, I don't know who's number 2, but when you need intel on the Marlins, he is so good. He's plugged in, and that's one of my favorite cheat codes, right? Is I have a Rays guy, I have a Cubs contact, I have a friend of mine who's always watching the Dodger game, I have friends of mine, a couple who are always watching the Giants game. I watch as much stuff as I can, but I'm not afraid to backstage whisper and say, hey, I'll go to Ariel and say, hey, did you watch the Mets game? I didn't see it. Tell me what I missed. Should I pick up Jose Quintana? I have a feeling you're gonna tell me no, but stuff like that. So that's one of my favorite cheat codes is find whether it's an industry source or just a friend of yours who happens to be a fan of the team, they're watching the game. They're picking up all sorts of intel from the announcers that you may miss because you didn't get a chance to watch that game and you were focused on something else. One of my favorite cheat codes for fantasy baseball.
Oh, yeah. Fangraphs used to do this. I don't know why they stopped, or they shouldn't have stopped, but they used to poll the fans on playing time for players, and they would ask first, what team are you a fan of? And then they would say, please let me know the playing time. That was the best source of playing time out there. Fans of their own team. So absolutely. And, sometimes if you can get some information about a player, we had on Anthony Bass when he was on the Marlins that year. We asked him on the show here. We said, who's the guy who's surprising you in training camp? He's like, Trevor Rogers looks great. We picked him up everywhere. He had a great season that year. People who are around the team, they're in tune. So always pay attention. Well, it was a great episode, Scott. We covered so much strategy and great information and great points on all around, great bold predictions and fun. So thank you very much for coming. And why don't you just tell everybody where we can read and see and listen to all stuff Scott Pianowski.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It was a blast. Scott_Pianowski on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, is a good way to engage with me. All my work is on Yahoo Sports. I am also a regular co-host on the Roto World Fantasy Baseball podcast with Eric Samulski. Occasionally DJ Short will join us. So on Sirius Radio, occasionally with the RotoWire guys. It's probably a weekly gig now. Look for me on Wednesday or Thursday there. But Yahoo Sports is where you can catch me. Twitter, Scott_Pianowski is where you can catch me. And we can talk whatever you want. Baseball, football, music, movies, dog photos, pizza, doesn't matter. Ariel, we didn't talk about this in our breakout pitchers, but I know you're a softball pitcher. I know you even rack up strikeouts sometimes. Should we pick up, and you mentioned, you don't have any major league wins yet, but it's a matter of time. How are you looking as the 2024 pickup?
For my recreational softball league, it's not a C league. It's better than beer league. But I did pitch in a good division to help out folks a couple of weeks ago. I'm doing pretty good. My screwball is A+ on. Velocity will come as the season goes on. I'm primed for a good year. My goal is to win the championship once again in a couple leagues, and I'd bet the over on it.
It blows my mind that you strike out players throw. You're not throwing like the windmill. I mean, you're not throwing in the heat, but you still get a fair amount of strikeouts, right?
So I never used to strike out people. I used to completely pitch to contact, and I would have a very good changeup, but I would throw it screwball action, and I just taught myself, you know what? I could just throw it harder. Throw a hard screwball, and instead of just breaking down, I'm tilting my body side to side, and it just breaks in towards the batter. So I get a lot of deception, and now, before, if I strike out one or two, I would say, wow, that's great. If I don't strike out 3-4 a game, I'm disappointed now. So, yeah, it's crazy, but I've learned new tricks. Even
That's
though
fantastic.
I'm aging, still great.
How many pitches do you throw in a game, would you say?
If I had to guess, 150?
Wow, so you're
Nine inning games.
Are you tired? Are they warming people up in the bullpen? Do they count your pitches, or you're going the whole way no matter what?
He is
No.
their bullpen.
Yeah,
You're the Nolan Ryan. You're just not, send everybody home. I'm pitching the whole game.
So amazingly, I actually prefer pitching more, and when we have double headers, I like going even 10, 13, 14 innings. I find that I pitch better as the game goes on, because when I first start, I'm not used to the mound that day. I'm a little bit short, a bit high. But once we get to the second, third, fourth inning, I just command the pitch as well, and I keep going. So
Fascinating.
Don't need to come out after the ninth. I do a trick, though, if I have a doubleheader. I usually have somebody else start it, pitch 3 innings, and then I come in and I pitch the rest of the game in the next doubleheader. And that's about my
Opener.
limit.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, there's some pitchers who would say, I remember the late, great Tim Wakefield would say, a lot of knuckleballers would say this, that they didn't want to be too strong when they pitched because it would screw up something to do with their mechanics or something, and they actually pitched better when they were a little bit fatigued. I've heard a lot of pitchers say that too.
Yeah, well, I don't throw all that fast, so it's more deceptive than fast. That's why I don't run out of gas. I just hit spots better as the game goes on. So,
Now, are you one of the pitchers who can hit, or are you bat ninth because you're a liability?
when I used to play when I was young, actually, Ruven was on the team. Remember that? Back in Queens. I was a leadoff hitter. I was one of these guys with like a 400 or 500 batting average, just get singles. I've definitely tailed off in that. I just try to drive it to left and try to beat out somebody now. So I bat myself maybe 7th, 8th, 9th these days. So that's declined. Listen, we've got a bunch of 19, 20, 22-year-olds in the team. I'm 41. So, they've surpassed me. But pitching-wise, I've never been better.
I didn't realize you were the manager too.
I'm often the coach. I gather the guys. I
Okay.
actually run a bunch of the leagues that I play in as well. So
Baseball needs a player manager. I remember Don Kessinger a million years ago, and then of course Pete Rose, while he was chasing Ty Cobb. He probably shouldn't have been playing, but he was trying to get to the hit record, and the Reds really
Wasn't Joe Torre? Joe Torre was a player manager also for a while, I think.
Was he? I don't remember
With
that.
the
It's
Braves,
possibly
I
true.
think.
Frank Robinson
With the Braves.
was, I think, with the back when they were the Indians in the '70s, was a player manager too. Dave Cowens in the NBA, Celtics, when they kind of bottomed out right before they
it's
got
more
Larry
common
Bird.
in a recreational league than in a major league. now.
I'm just trying to put you up. I'm just trying to compare you to the greats. You got Pete Rose, you got Dave Cowens, you got Frank Robinson, you got Ariel Cohen. Yeah.
Well, I definitely aspire to that. Thank you very
There
much.
you go.
Ruvain, what about you? What's going on?
You can follow me on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at MLB Injury Guru, where I'm tweeting out injury updates as they come. And my first article for Rotoballer will be coming out this weekend, discussing the injuries I discussed today, as well as other injuries, all the injuries that are important for your fantasy team.
And by the way, you used to play ball. I remember you were on the Patrick Davitt show, Scott, and talking about that you were the shortstop, and even though there was an actual legit, really good guy, you were the shortstop that year, and sort of transition. I remember that story. Great story.
11 years old. Yeah, the great Jimmy Bolton, who went on to play college baseball, was forced to watch the lesser player play shortstop because I was the incumbent. I was like, Alex Rodriguez goes to the Yankees. He should have been the shortstop, but we'll let Derek Jeter. Not that I'm anywhere near as good as those guys relatively, but we all have our level of competition. I played softball, not as long as you did, and not probably as competitively as you did, but I played a lot of softball in my 20s and 30s, and my friends and I look back, and we're all over the country now, just how much fun those days were, and we're all good at different things, and it's nothing beats the joy of the camaraderie of being on a team.
Yeah, well, for me, fantasy baseball is number 2 to playing real baseball. I want to keep that as long as I can. And by the way, if anybody comes to first pitch, we had a fantastic wiffle ball game.
Did you really?
We did.
I played so much wiffle ball as a kid that I think James Andrews probably needed to fix my shoulder, but If I think I might have told this story in the Davitt show, maybe I did. But one day I played wiffle ball all day, and I threw like an insane amount of pitches. And then I had a league baseball game that night, and I would occasionally pitch. I was a very accurate pitcher, but I had no stuff. I could throw strikes, but I couldn't really get it to move. That I would kind of cut my fastball a little bit, but I didn't really have a curve or any. I had basically, if Saris graded my stuff, he'd be like, whatever the lowest grade is, give him that. He throws strikes though.
I think Cyrus batted against Nick Pollock, if I believe it's possible.
Is that
Nick
true?
Was
Yeah. So was there. I pitched the first half. It wasn't a game. It was more just everyone come on and play. I pitched the first half. Nick Pollock pitched the second, and Saris got an at bat there as well.
That's outstanding. So anyway, this stupid baseball story that I'm sure nobody cares about. I play wiffle ball all day. I have a town league game that night. I think I'm just playing the infield, and I'm pitching that night. And my arm, I go to warm up, and it's like an alligator is biting my arm. I am in pain, and I'm afraid. And my manager was kind of an old, crotchety guy, and I was afraid to tell him I couldn't pitch because I loved pitching, even though I wasn't that great at it. I really enjoyed it. I'm like, if I tell him I can't pitch, he'll bench me. He'll get mad at me, especially if I tell him I was playing wiffle ball all day. So I'll just gut it out. And in the first inning, our team bats around. We score a ton of runs, and I'm like, oh great, I don't even have to be that good. This is a big lead, and I pitch really poorly. And this one guy came up named Mike O'Keefe, who was a kid I went to high school with. He was a star at my high school eventually, and I set a bunch of records. He played college baseball. I believe he's actually the coach at Chelmsford High now. And he comes up, and I throw him my junky inside fastball, and he hits the crap out of it, but he hits it foul. But he hits like into the trees. And he's mad, and he's looking at me, and he's like spitting, and he's like Will Clark. He just looks really ticked off. and then I throw him another pitch, and he clobbers it between the right. He's a left-handed hitter, just a frozen rope guy. Again, Will Clark is a great comp. He's like a high school Will Clark. He clobbers this pitch. It goes between the right fielder and the center fielder on a clothesline, zips through them, and goes into a soccer game that's like out in Nowheresville. And O'Keefe could have run around the bases 3 times before that ball was retrieved. But because it went into the soccer game, the official holds up 2. It's a ground rule double. And O'Keefe is looking at me. I don't know if I remember this accurately. I remember the ground rule double was true. But I just remember O'Keefe looking at me and like being pissed off. And that should have been a home run. And anyway, if I remember the game correctly, I eventually got knocked out. And then the game ended like where it was really dark. The game probably should have been over, but they're trying to get the last inning in. And this is so all of our stories are not glorious. I'm playing the infield at the end of the game, and I think the game was tied, and they hit a soft liner to me, and I lost it in the dark. It hit me. It hit off my glove. It squirted into the outfield. So I was literally the go to the game.
Ugh.
And when you're a kid and you're the go to the game, there's nothing worse. I think the next day was like the worst day of my life.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
That's all right.
Yeah.
I had plenty of happy stories I could tell you, but I thought I'd tell you a sad one.
Funny how the word goat changed. Now goat means the greatest.
Right, goat means the greatest of all time. Jerry Rice and Tom Brady and whoever.
How things have changed. All right, well, I'm Ariel Cohen, ATCNY on Twitter, X. Find my work over at Fangraphs, over at Rotoballer, projections on the site, over at RotoWire as well. And of course, you can listen to me right here on the Beat the Shift podcast each and every week. Well, this is a fantastic episode. So thank you so much, Scott Pianowski, for coming on the show. Thanks for listening to our softball stories, and hope you got a lot of great information and fun out of this one. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.